I converted an abandoned casino into my zombie apocalypse fortress. The Riverside Grand Casino closed 11 months before the first infection report. I know because I was there on closing night, watching the last gamblers cash out their chips with that particular defeated shuffle of people leaving a party nobody wanted to end. I was there because I'd spent 4 years as a structural engineer, consulting on the building's renovation. A renovation that ownership abandoned when the tribal council pulled funding after a corruption scandal ate through their leadership like rot through drywall. I knew every load-bearing wall, every reinforced concrete pour, every emergency exit and ventilation shaft in that building. I knew where the walls were double thick and where they'd cut corners. I knew its bones better than I knew my own. So when the broadcasts started, not the official ones, those came later, but the scattered cell phone videos out of Tulsa showing people moving wrong, biting wrong, dying wrong, and then not staying dead. I didn't board up my apartment. I didn't drive for the mountains. I drove 40 minutes east on Route 66 to the empty parking lot of the Riverside Grand, popped the maintenance entrance lock with the key I'd copied 18 months earlier, and walked into 37,000 square feet of reinforced concrete, steel frame construction, and commercial-grade infrastructure that nobody on Earth was coming to claim. That was 14 months ago. I am writing this from what used to be the High Roller Lounge on the 3rd floor, which I have converted into a monitoring station overlooking 400 meters of cleared sightline in every direction. The slot machines are gone. I pushed most of them against the ground floor windows months ago as secondary barricade weight. The card tables are firewood. The decorative fountains are rain catchment systems. The commercial kitchen feeds 11 people 3 meals a day from hydroponics I built in the old conference rooms using grow lights powered by the solar array I mounted on the flat roof. 11 people. That number used to be higher. It also used to be 1. I need to tell this story from the beginning because I need someone to understand what I built here. Not the walls, not the water systems, not the generators or the traps or the sight lines. I need someone to understand what building this place did to me, what it showed me about the architecture of my own mind when I was finally given a structure with no building codes, no client, no oversight, and no limit on what I was permitted to do. My name is Daniel Kershaw. I am 41 years old. Before the collapse, I was the kind of man people described as capable but hard to work with. I preferred the term precise. My ex-wife preferred the term controlling. My former business partner preferred the term insufferable. These descriptions are all accurate depending on your tolerance for someone who sees inefficiency as a personal insult. The first 3 weeks alone in this building were the happiest of my life. I say that with full awareness of what it reveals. I moved through the Riverside Grand like a composer entering an empty concert hall. Every room was a problem to solve. Every vulnerability was a puzzle that rewarded elegant thinking. The ground floor had 14 exterior doors. I sealed 12 with poured concrete mixed from bags I hauled from the abandoned hardware store on Route 66. The remaining 2 I converted into airlocks. Double door systems with the outer door reinforced with welded steel plate and the inner door barricaded on a pulley system I could operate from the 2nd floor. The parking structure connected to the main building via a sky bridge on the 2nd level. I severed it with a cutting torch on day 4, creating a 12-foot gap that nothing without a running start and functioning cognition could cross. Then I welded a retractable bridge from steel shelving, something I could extend when I needed vehicle access to the garage and retract when I didn't. I was solving problems faster than they appeared. I was building something perfect. The infected didn't reach my stretch of Route 66 in numbers until day 9. I watched them from the rooftop, a scattered column of 11, then 30, then what I estimated at 200 over 6 hours, migrating east along the highway following some stimulus I never identified. They never looked up. The Riverside Grand's parking lot is 4 acres of open asphalt, with no cover higher than a concrete traffic bollard. The building itself sits on a slight rise, maybe 8 feet of elevation above the surrounding grade, which the original architects chose for flood drainage, but which gave me something far more valuable: a kill zone with no blind spots. I didn't fire on that first column. I watched them from behind the rooftop parapet with a pair of binoculars I'd taken from the hunting section of the sporting goods store during my first supply run. And I cataloged everything. Gate speed, roughly 2 miles per hour. Stimulus response, primarily auditory, secondarily visual at close range. Group cohesion, none. They moved in proximity, but showed no coordination, no communication, no awareness of each other beyond obstacle avoidance. When one fell into the drainage ditch at the lot's eastern edge, the others walked past without reaction. I was taking notes, literal notes, in a hard-bound engineering journal I'd bought for the renovation project. I titled the first page Behavioral Observations and began logging time-stamped entries with the same precision I'd once used for concrete cure schedules. There is something deeply wrong with a man who responds to the apocalypse by starting a spreadsheet. I knew that then. I did it anyway because the alternative was feeling something, and I had a building to finish. By day 14, I had completed what I called Phase 1, full perimeter hardening. Every ground floor opening was sealed or controlled. Every second floor window was barricaded from inside with furniture and steel sheeting. The roof was accessible only through a single reinforced stairwell with 3 separate locking mechanisms. The generator room, a beautiful concrete bunker the casino had built to house their backup power, was stocked with 400 gallons of diesel I'd siphoned from the gas station a half-mile south. I was untouchable. Nothing dead or living was getting through those walls without explosives or a battering ram. And here is where I need to be honest about what that felt like, because it felt like the first time in my entire life that I was living correctly. Every room had a purpose. Every object served a function. There was no clutter, no negotiation, no compromised design, because a client wanted something cheaper, or a building inspector demanded something ugly. It was my structure, answering to my logic, serving my survival, pure. I talked to myself constantly during those first weeks. Full conversations, both sides. Sometimes I narrated what I was doing like a documentary host. Sometimes I argued with my ex-wife, Jessica, in the empty poker room, winning every argument retroactively the way you do when the other person isn't there to point out you're being ridiculous. I told myself this was normal isolation behavior, adaptive pressure release. On day 16, I saw my first close contact. A woman she'd been a woman pressed against the sealed glass of the main entrance vestibule. The exterior door had failed somehow. I'd barricaded it, but the lock mechanism hadn't engaged properly, and she'd pushed through into the gap between the outer and inner doors. She stood there for 6 hours, palms flat on the interior glass, face pressed sideways against it, completely motionless. Not pounding, not snarling, just present, like a fish against an aquarium wall. I watched her on the security monitor from the 3rd floor. The casino's camera system still functioned on backup power, and I'd maintained it as my primary surveillance tool. I watched her for 6 hours without moving from my chair. I could have opened the inner door and dealt with her. One woman, contained in a 6 by 4 foot space, arms at her sides, a claw hammer from 3 feet away. But I watched instead. I told myself I was observing, learning. truth is, I was enjoying the demonstration. Something wanted in. My walls said no. The system worked. She was proof of concept. On the morning of day 17, she was gone. The outer door had swung back open and she'd wandered out. I fixed the lock mechanism that afternoon and reinforced the vestibule with additional steel plating. Then I sat in the high roller lounge and felt something I hadn't felt since the early drafts of the renovation project, back when the plans were still elegant, before the budget cuts and client interference stripped them down to mediocrity. I felt like an architect whose building was finally performing as designed. The first supply run nearly killed me because I made it too late. I'd calculated a 30-day self-sufficiency window based on the casino's existing infrastructure. The kitchen freezers still held commercial food stocks. The water system ran on municipal pressure that was still functioning. And my diesel reserve covered generator power for weeks. So I hadn't left the building since day 4. 26 days of perfect isolation. 26 days of building and reinforcing and cataloging and talking to nobody. On day 30, I raised the sky bridge to the parking garage, descended to my truck, and drove toward the Walmart distribution center 8 miles south that I'd marked on my planning map before I'd even arrived at the casino. The road was different. The first week's scattered wanderers had become a permanent population. They clustered around structures, gas stations, houses, the strip mall at the Route 66 interchange, not because they were using the buildings, but because some echo of spatial habit kept them gravitating toward doorways and parking lots. I drove past a Denny's with 40 of them standing in the lot like the world's worst brunch crowd. The distribution center's loading docks were open. Someone had been here before me. The office area was trashed, personal items scattered, but the warehouse floor was largely intact. I backed my truck to a dock and started loading. Canned goods, bottled water, batteries, first aid supplies. Systematic, efficient. I had a list. I was 40 minutes into the loading process when I heard the bay door at the far end of the warehouse rattle. Not wind, rhythmic. Something pushing against it from outside with the kind of persistent, mindless pressure I'd seen at my vestibule. Then the door bent inward at the bottom. A gap appeared maybe 16 inches, and a body began squeezing through. I'd brought a crowbar and a hunting rifle I'd never fired. The rifle was in the truck. The crowbar was in my hand. I stood between 40 feet of loaded pallets and watched a figure compress itself under that bent door with a mechanical persistence that made my throat close. Then a second gap appeared at the next bay door. I left 4 pallets of supplies on the loading dock and drove out through the front entrance, doing 50 miles an hour with my headlights, cutting through 2 figures that bounced off the brush guard I'd welded to the truck's front end the previous week. The sound they made against the steel was like hitting a deer. Heavy, wet, wrong. Back at the casino, bridge retracted, truck parked in the garage, hands shaking against the steering wheel for 10 minutes before I could unload. I'd been sloppy, overconfident. I'd treated the supply run like an errand instead of an operation. The next morning, I redesigned my entire logistics approach. Smaller vehicle, I'd find a motorcycle or ATV for speed and maneuverability. Closer targets map every structure within a 3-mile radius and clear them methodically rather than making long single runs. Noise discipline the truck's engine had been audible for a quarter mile in the silence. I spent 2 days building a route map with every road, structure, and observed infected concentration marked in colored pencil. I mounted it on the wall of the high roller lounge and updated it after every rooftop observation session. This was when I started to feel it. The pleasure of total authority over a defined space. Every problem had a solution I controlled. Every variable answered to my planning. The world outside was chaos and death. But inside these walls, inside this radius of mapped territory, I was the only governing intelligence. I decided what moved. I decided what entered. I decided what lived and what didn't. I am aware of how that sounds. I'm telling you anyway because what happened next requires you to understand who I had become by the time other people arrived. On day 43, I was on the rooftop conducting my dawn scan when I saw movement on Route 66, westbound, moving with purpose and speed, not infected. The infected don't run in straight lines. The infected don't carry backpacks. 2 people, moving fast, heading toward my building. My first thought was not, survivors, thank God. My first thought was, who told them about my casino? I watched them through binoculars for 7 minutes as they crossed the parking lot. A man and a woman, both mid-30s, both carrying frame packs with sleeping bags strapped to the outside. The man had a shotgun slung across his chest. The woman carried a baseball bat with something dark staining the business end. They moved well, checking corners, communicating with hand signals, covering each other's angles. They reached the main entrance and stopped. The woman ran her hands along the welded steel plate, knocked twice, then stepped back and looked up directly at the rooftop parapet where I was crouching. "We can see the solar panels," she called up. "We know someone's here." I said nothing. I had a rifle, the same one I'd never fired, resting on the parapet ledge. I'd practiced with it since the distribution center run, burning through 40 rounds on the eastern fire escape, shooting at painted targets in the back lot. I was not a good shot. I was adequate at 50 meters. They were at 30 meters. "We're not looking for trouble," the man said. "We've been walking for 3 days. We just need water and we'll keep moving." I could have given them water. I had 300 gallons in the rooftop catchment tanks, and the municipal supply was still trickling. I could have lowered a bucket on a rope and never opened a single door. It would have cost me nothing. I waited 4 minutes. Then I stood up so they could see me. "Where are you coming from?" I said. Not a question, a demand. "Oklahoma City," the man said. "Or what's left of it. We're trying to reach family in Joplin." "You're going the wrong direction." We had to detour. There's a herd on I-44, thousands, stretches for miles. We came south to go around. I processed this. A migration column that size meant regional population displacement. It meant the infection density east of here was orders of magnitude higher than my observations suggested. It meant my 3-mile radius map was a child's drawing of a continent. "How many are you?" I said. "Just us, Craig and Nina." "How did you find this building?" Nina looked at Craig. Craig shifted his weight. "We saw the cleared sight lines from the highway. The parking lot's been swept clean. No abandoned cars, no debris. That's not natural. Someone maintains this." She was right. I'd spent 2 full days pushing every vehicle in the lot to the perimeter, creating a clean visual field. I'd thought of it as defensive design. I hadn't considered that it was also a beacon, a signal visible from the highway that screamed, "Someone competent is here." I stood on the rooftop for a long time. They waited below without speaking, which told me something about their patience and their discipline. Desperate people shout. Dangerous people circle. These 2 stood still and let me decide. Here is what I was thinking. Every person inside these walls is a variable I cannot fully control. Every additional body is a potential failure point, someone who might leave a door unlocked, make noise at the wrong time, challenge a decision I've already optimized. I had built a system that functioned perfectly for one. Every addition degraded that perfection. Here also is what I was thinking. I had not spoken to another human being in 43 days, and the sound of Nina's voice calling up to me had made my hands shake in a way that had nothing to do with fear. I lowered a rope ladder from the second-floor window. "You can stay one night," I said. "I'll show you the safest route east in the morning." They stayed. I gave them a room on the second floor, the old hotel wing the casino had added for their high roller guests. I locked the stairwell door between their floor and mine from my side. I slept with the rifle next to my bed for the first time. In the morning, I showed them my route map. I showed them where I'd observed infected concentrations. I explained the behavioral patterns I'd documented. Craig looked at the map for a long time. Then he looked at me. "You built all this alone?" "Yes." "And you want to stay alone?" I didn't answer because the honest answer was yes, and the honest answer was also that I'd slept 8 hours for the first time in 2 weeks, knowing someone else was breathing in the same building. They left that afternoon. I watched them from the rooftop until they disappeared east on Route 66. Then I went back inside, and the silence had a different texture. Like a room you've rearranged, same furniture, same walls. But something's shifted, and your body knows even when your eyes can't find it. Craig and Nina came back 9 days later. They came back with 4 others. I was on the rooftop when I saw them, 6 figures on Route 66, moving in a loose column with Craig on point and Nina covering the rear. The 4 between them moved with less discipline, but more urgency. A heavy-set older man with a limp, a young woman carrying a child on her hip, and a teenage boy hauling a plastic storage bin with both arms. They'd made it 30 miles east before they hit the herd Nina had described. Not thousands, tens of thousands, filling the highway and the surrounding fields like a slow-moving flood. They'd tried to circle south and found the bridges over the Arkansas River destroyed, whether by military action or survivors, they couldn't tell. Every route east was sealed. Craig stood at my barricade and looked up at the rooftop where I stood watching them. "I know what I said," he called, "but there's nowhere to go." The child on the young woman's hip was maybe 2 years old. She had her face buried in her mother's neck and her small hands gripping the collar of the woman's jacket. She was silent, not sleeping. Just silent, in that way children become when they've learned that sound brings danger. I stood on the rooftop and felt the architectural perfection of my building stretch like a skin being asked to cover a larger frame. 6 people, 6 additional bodies requiring water, food, sanitation, space, and most critically governance. Rules, structure, someone deciding who does what, when, and why. I lowered the rope ladder. That evening, I sat them in the old poker room, the one where I'd argued with Jessica's ghost, and I laid out the rules. Not negotiable, not collaborative. Rules. The building operates on my schedule. Dawn sweep, breakfast at 0700, work assignments by 0730. Everyone contributes labor or everyone leaves. No modifications to any structural system without my approval. No opening any exterior access point without my direct supervision. No noise above conversational volume after dark. No waste of any resource, water, food, fuel, ammunition. Craig listened with his arms crossed. Nina studied the route map on the wall. The older man, his name was Darren, a retired HVAC tech from Broken Arrow, nodded slowly, evaluating. The young mother, Sophia, held her daughter Maya close and watched me with eyes that were deciding whether I was safety or another kind of danger. The teenager Jake asked, "What if we disagree with something?" "You tell me," I said. "I'll consider it. Then I'll decide." "So you're in charge. I built this. I maintain this. I understand its systems." "Yes." Craig said nothing. Nina said nothing. Sophia pressed her lips together and adjusted Maya's weight on her hip and said, "Where do we sleep?" I gave them the second floor. I kept the third floor and the roof access locked and exclusive to me. The monitoring station, the route map, the weapons cache, the communication equipment I'd salvaged from the casino's old security office, all mine. They had living quarters, access to the kitchen, and the common area on the ground floor behind the barricades. The first week worked. Darren was extraordinarily useful. He understood mechanical systems instinctively and identified 3 efficiency improvements to my water reclamation setup that I hadn't considered. Craig and Nina ran perimeter patrols on the rooftop during their assigned shifts. Sophia managed the kitchen and the food inventory with a librarian's precision. Jake complained constantly but carried out every assigned task when directly supervised. I slept well. The building had more hands to maintain it, more eyes to watch its boundaries, more labor to improve its systems. Every person served a function. Every function served the structure. On day 4 of the new arrangement, I found Craig on the 3rd floor landing my floor examining the stairwell lock. "Looking for something?" I said from behind him. He turned slowly, no guilt on his face, just assessment. "Wanted to check the rooftop water tanks. Darren mentioned the filtration system feeds from up there. I'll show Darren the filtration intake tomorrow. He doesn't need roof access for that." "Daniel." Craig's voice was careful. The voice of a man choosing his words around someone he's not sure of. "We're all living here. The roof shouldn't be restricted. The roof has the solar array, the communications equipment, and 400 feet of unguarded perimeter edge. One accident, one noise, one unsecured door, and the entire building's sightline advantage is compromised. So train us. Give us access with protocols. When I'm confident in your training, I will." He held my gaze for 5 seconds. Then he walked back downstairs. That night, I added a second lock to the stairwell door. The thing about control is that it only feels like control if you can see the edges. A king who can't see his borders doesn't feel like a king. He feels like a man standing in fog. My borders were concrete and steel. My authority was architectural. The building itself enforced my decisions. Locked doors, restricted floors, access points that required my physical presence to operate. I didn't need obedience, I needed walls. This is what I understood that Craig didn't. In a building, the person who controls vertical movement controls everything. Whoever holds the high ground holds the stairwells. Whoever holds the stairwells holds the floors. Whoever holds the floors decides who goes where, who sees what, who knows what. The casino's original architects hadn't thought in terms of control. They'd thought in terms of flow, moving gamblers past as many machines as possible. But I'd redesigned the flow. I'd created choke points, bottlenecks, single-access corridors. The building served me now. The second week brought 2 more arrivals, a married couple, Hector and Diane, who'd been sheltering in a church basement 2 miles south until their food ran out. They'd seen our rooftop solar panels, those panels kept announcing me to anyone with elevation and eyes, and walked in on a Thursday morning while Craig was on watch. Craig let them in without asking me. I found out when I came down to the kitchen for my morning coffee, and there were 2 strangers sitting at the prep table eating canned peaches. Craig stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, the same posture he'd used in the poker room on the first night, the same evaluating stillness. "They needed help," he said. "That's not your decision. It should be someone's decision who's actually on watch when people show up. Then notify me. That's the protocol." "You were asleep, Daniel." They were standing in the open in daylight. I'm not leaving people in the kill zone while I climb 3 flights to wake you up. He was right about the tactical reality. He was wrong about the principle. But I looked at Hector and Diane, both in their 50s, both exhausted, Diane's hands shaking around her spoon. And I said nothing else. That night, I moved a radio handset to the second-floor watch station so Craig could contact me directly. I told myself this was an efficiency improvement. It was also the first time I'd changed a system because someone else's logic was better than mine, and I hated it with a precision that surprised me. 8 people now. The building could support 20. I'd calculated this during Phase 1 planning, mostly as an intellectual exercise. Food was the constraint. Water and power could scale, but calories were finite without resupply or agriculture. On day 59, I began converting the old conference rooms on the ground floor into growing spaces. Darren helped me rig the grow lights to the solar system. Sophia started seedlings in cups on the kitchen windowsill, tomatoes, peppers, herbs. Jake hauled soil from the landscaping beds outside the building, working in supervised 5-minute trips through the secondary airlock. The building was changing. It had been my instrument, an extension of my hands and my mind. Now, it was becoming something else. A small society's infrastructure. Every modification I made was no longer purely my vision. It was a negotiation between what I wanted and what 8 people needed. The hydroponic tables went where I planned them, but Sophia's seedling shelf went where she asked. And Darren's workshop occupied a room I designated as secondary storage. I caught myself standing in the high-roller lounge at night, looking down through the interior windows at the ground floor where people moved and talked and existed, and feeling something I can only describe as the opposite of loneliness. Not connection, not warmth. Something more like a landlord watching tenants aware of their presence, responsible for their container, separate from their lives by a vertical boundary I'd designed. Jessica would have recognized this feeling. She'd described our house the same way once. I live in your building, Daniel. I don't live with you. I'd told her she was being dramatic. She wasn't being dramatic. She was being architecturally precise. On day 62, Craig asked me to hold a group meeting. A real one. Everyone present, everyone speaking, decisions made collectively. I said no. He asked why. Because a building doesn't function by committee, I said. Every structural decision has a single engineer of record. That's not ego, that's physics. This isn't a building decision. This is about whether we send a scouting team south to check the bridge situation. That's a resource allocation decision that affects building security. My decision. He stared at me. Then he said, very quietly, "How long do you think this works, Daniel?" "It works until the building fails. The building won't fail because I won't let it fail." He walked away. I went to the roof and I watched the sunset over 400 meters of empty parking lot. And I felt perfectly justified and completely alone. And I could not tell the difference between those two things. The scouting team went south without my approval. Craig, Nina, and Jake, armed with a shotgun and 2 baseball bats, left through the ground floor airlock at dawn on day 64 while I was doing my rooftop sweep. By the time I noticed the airlock seal indicator on my monitoring board, they were already across the parking lot. I stood at the parapet and watched them jog south along Route 66 and disappear behind the gas station I'd stripped clean weeks earlier. My hand was on the rifle, not aimed, just present, touching the stock the way you touch a wall to confirm the room is still there. They were gone for 9 hours. I spent those 9 hours doing nothing. Not maintaining systems, not updating maps, not reinforcing or improving or calculating. I sat in the monitoring station, and I watched every camera feed, and I waited. And the building felt like a machine missing 3 gears, still standing, still enclosed, but not running. Not functioning. Just existing. Static. Without the labor it now required to be alive. This was the first time I understood what Craig had actually done by bringing people inside. He hadn't degraded my system. He'd made me dependent on it. A one-man fortress is a one-man project, optional, adjustable, abandonable. A 9-person shelter is an obligation, a weight, a thing you cannot set down without hearing it hit the ground. They returned at dusk with information. The bridges south were indeed destroyed. But a rail line crossed the river 14 miles downstream on a trestle bridge that was intact. The route was passable, but exposed open terrain, limited cover, and they'd observed a concentration of infected around the old rail yard that would require planning to bypass. Craig delivered this report in the poker room, to the group, without inviting me. I found out because Darren mentioned it at dinner casually, assuming I knew. Craig says the rail bridge looks solid. Might be our east route when the weather breaks. I set my fork down. What meeting? Darren's face told me everything. The particular expression of a man realizing he's accidentally revealed a fracture he wasn't supposed to see. I found Craig in the second-floor corridor. I didn't shout. I don't shout. I've never been a man who shouts. Shouting is structural failure of the voice. I spoke precisely. You held a meeting, without me, about evacuation routes. It was a debrief about a trip I led. A trip you took without authorization from a building I maintain with my knowledge and my labor. Daniel. He put his hands in his pockets, casual, choosing to be casual, which is its own kind of aggression. Nobody's planning to leave tomorrow. I'm gathering information, so we have options. That's smart. You'd do the same thing. I would do it as part of the integrated planning process for this facility. This isn't a facility. It's a place where people live. People get to know their options. People get to know what I determine they need to know to function safely within this structure. The words came out, and I heard them. Heard what they sounded like from outside my own skull. And I did not take them back. Because I meant them. Because the building was mine, and the knowledge of the building was mine, and the authority derived from that knowledge was mine. And if other people now possessed operational intelligence about routes and conditions beyond my walls, then my walls were no longer the boundary of relevant information. The world was leaking in. My architecture was losing its seal. Craig looked at me for a long time. He didn't argue. He didn't push back. He just nodded once and said, "Okay, Daniel." And he walked away. "Okay, Daniel," was worse than any argument. It meant he'd stopped trying to change my mind. It meant he was routing around me. It meant my walls were still standing, but my authority was already perforated. And the only person who didn't know it was me. I went to the roof. I stood at the parapet. The parking lot was empty, the sight lines clean, the perimeter intact. And for the first time in 70 days, the perfection of it made me feel sick. I need to describe the building now as it existed on day 70, because it's important for you to see what I saw, what I'd made, what it looked like when it was still mine. In the way, I mean when I say mine. The ground floor was the defensive shell. 14 sealed access points, 2 operational airlocks, barricade mass totaling approximately 6 tons of welded steel plate, slot machine housings, poured concrete, and sandbags. The windows were triple layered. Interior plywood, steel mesh, an exterior steel plate with observation slits I could seal with sliding covers. The main gaming floor had been cleared of all machines and converted into a combination workshop, common area, and emergency fallback position wide sightlines. Multiple exit paths to the stairwells. Overhead lighting from the original ceiling fixtures rewired to the solar system. Ground floor also held the grow room's 3 former conference spaces lined with reflective sheeting, fitted with salvaged grow lights, and planted with tomatoes, lettuce, peppers, beans, and herbs in hydroponic channels I'd built from PVC pipe and plastic storage bins. Darren's filtration system fed them nutrient water recycled from the kitchen greywater system. Not elegant, but functional. We were 3 weeks from our first harvest. The second floor was residential. 9 rooms from the old hotel wing, each one furnished from the casino storage beds, linens, basic furnishings. Craig and Nina shared a room. Sophia and Maya had one. Darren occupied the one nearest the mechanical room he'd claimed as his domain. Hector and Diane were at the corridor's end. Jake bounced between 3 different rooms because he was 17 and couldn't commit to a sleeping location for more than 4 nights straight. The second floor also held the armory, a converted hotel safe room where I stored the weapons, the hunting rifle, Craig's shotgun, a .22 pistol I'd found at a pawn shop during a supply run, a compound bow Nina had brought, and approximately 300 rounds of mixed ammunition. I held the only key. The third floor was mine. The monitoring station in the high roller lounge. My bedroom in the former VIP suite. The communications room with the salvaged radio equipment I'd never managed to make transmit. I could receive on 3 frequencies, but broadcasting remained beyond my electrical knowledge. The planning room with the master map, the supply inventory, the population calculations, the contingency protocols. The roof, solar array, water catchment and filtration, observation positions at all 4 compass points, the retractable bridge mechanism connecting to the parking garage. I'm describing this like a blueprint because that is how I experienced it, as a document, as a design, as something I'd drawn and then built, and that now existed in the world as proof that Daniel Kershaw's mind could manifest in concrete and steel. But here is what the blueprint didn't show. Sophia singing to Maya in the kitchen at dawn. Darren laughing at his own bad jokes in the mechanical room. Nina teaching Jake to stretch and move quietly from a physical discipline she never named. Hector reading aloud from a paperback western he'd found in a nightstand drawer. Diane correcting his pronunciation of Spanish place names. Craig standing on the second-floor balcony at dusk, watching the same sunset I watched from the roof. 3 stories below me and in the same light. The building was alive with them. I knew this. I knew it the way an architect knows that a completed building will be occupied theoretically, abstractly, as a future tense fact that doesn't require emotional adjustment. But it did require adjustment, because alive things grow, alive things change, alive things develop needs and desires and trajectories that don't appear on any blueprint. And alive things, eventually, refuse to be contained. On day 74, Sophia asked me for a key to the armory. She asked during breakfast, in front of everyone, with Maya on her hip, and her face carrying that particular expression of someone who has practiced a sentence many times before, saying it aloud. "I want to know how to use the rifle," she said. "And I want access to the weapons when I'm on ground floor watch." I chewed my canned fruit. I looked at her. I looked at the room, Craig carefully not watching. Nina cleaning her knife with exaggerated focus. Darren finding something fascinating about his coffee cup. "You don't have ground floor watch," I said. "You're assigned kitchen and inventory." "I'm reassigning myself. Jake can handle kitchen. I want a watch rotation." Assignments aren't self-selected. Then I'm requesting reassignment. Formally, however you want me to ask. I could have said no. The word was right there, a single syllable. My default setting. The architectural foundation of my authority. No is a load-bearing wall. No is what keeps the ceiling up. But Sophia was looking at me with eyes that held no aggression, no challenge, no defiance. Just clarity. The clarity of a woman who had carried a child through the end of the world and was not asking permission to be dangerous. She was informing me that she already was, and offering me the courtesy of being included in what happened next. I'll train you on the .22 this afternoon, I said. We'll discuss watch rotation after I evaluate your proficiency. She nodded. Maya reached for a piece of fruit on the table, and Sophia shifted her to the other hip with unconscious grace. Thank you, Daniel. It wasn't a concession. It was a crack. Hairline, structural, invisible from the outside. But I felt it in the same way I'd once felt microfractures in concrete during stress tests, not through the eyes, but through the hands, through the frequency of things. That afternoon, I took Sophia to the eastern fire escape, my private range, and taught her to load, aim, and fire the .22 pistol. She was a terrible shot for the first 20 rounds. By round 40, she was grouping within 6 inches at 20 meters. By round 60, she was better than me. I gave her a key to the armory the next morning. Not the key, a copy I made from the building's key-cutting machine in the maintenance closet. My key remained mine, but she had access now. Another person with access to a room that had been solely mine. The cracks were multiplying. Day 78. Darren proposed modifications to the solar array mounting that would increase panel angle efficiency by 12%. His calculations were correct. I checked them twice. But implementing the changes required roof access, which meant giving Darren a key to the stairwell, which meant the 3rd floor was no longer exclusively mine. I gave him access. Supervised, scheduled, limited to the array maintenance platform. But the door opened for someone else now. The seal was broken. Day 81. Jake asked if he could set up a fitness area in one of the empty ground floor rooms. I said yes, because it was a reasonable request, and because he'd started doing push-ups in the hallway at midnight, and the sound carried through the building's steel frame. Day 83. Nina asked to move the bow and her quiver from the armory to her room. I'm faster with it if it's within reach. Logical, tactically sound. I said yes. Day 85. Hector asked to use the communications room to try the radio. He'd been an amateur operator before retirement. Still remembered Morse code. Thought he might get a signal out where I hadn't. I said yes, because I'd been failing at it for weeks, and my pride was less important than contact with anyone beyond these walls. Every yes was a brick removed. Every accommodation was a wall getting thinner. I was still the architect. I was still the one who understood the building's bones. But the building was no longer my instrument. It was becoming a commons, a shared space, a place where 9 people lived and made decisions that shaped its function whether I approved or not. I stood in the high roller lounge on day 86 and looked at my route map and saw that Craig had added 3 marks to it while I'd been training Sophia. Red X's indicating infected concentrations he'd observed from the 2nd floor balcony. His handwriting on my map, marking his observations on my document. I stared at those red marks for 20 minutes. Then I added a date stamp next to each one and integrated them into my tracking pattern. Because they were accurate. Because they improved the map. Because the map was better with them. And because admitting that felt like losing something I couldn't name. The group meeting happened on day 89. Craig didn't ask my permission this time, he announced it. Everyone in the poker room after dinner. Things to discuss. I attended, not because I accepted the premise, but because absence would mean decisions made without me. And that was architecturally worse than presence within a framework I hadn't designed. 9 people in a room, Craig standing, everyone else seated. Me in the back corner, arms crossed, rifle not present, because I'd decided that bringing it would communicate something I wasn't ready to say aloud. Craig's agenda was simple. Winter was coming. The building's heating system was insufficient for the ground floor's volume. The casino had been designed for climate control through a commercial HVAC system that required more power than our solar array could deliver. Options were to consolidate living space to fewer rooms, increase insulation, or find a supplementary heat source. Darren proposed wood-burning stoves vented through the existing kitchen exhaust system. Reasonable but required exterior wood collection, increased exposure, increased noise, increased risk. Nina proposed consolidating everyone to the second floor and sealing the ground floor stairwell doors during nighttime hours, reducing the heated volume by 60%. This was elegant, but meant abandoning the ground floor watch position after dark. I proposed nothing. I sat and listened and watched 9 people discuss the infrastructure of my building as though it belonged to them. It did. I knew it did. By day 89 it did, in every way except the legal concept of ownership, which meant nothing anymore. They'd repaired it, they'd improved it, they'd bled sweat into its concrete and wood, and they'd kept it functioning through labor I could not have sustained alone. Darren's maintenance work alone had extended 3 critical systems past their failure date. But knowing a thing and accepting a thing are different engineering problems, and acceptance requires a foundation I hadn't poured. The group voted on Nina's consolidation plan, 8-1. I voted no, not because the plan was bad, but because voting implied equality of authority. And I wasn't ready to grant that, even as I understood I could no longer withhold it. Craig noticed. After the meeting, he found me on the stairs between 2 and 3, my territory boundary, the liminal space where my authority still had physical expression. You voted no, he said. But you didn't argue. Why? Because the plan will work. My objection isn't operational. Then what is it? I looked at him. Craig, square-jawed, steady, competent in a way that didn't need to announce itself. A man built for collaboration the way I was built for solitude. A man who'd walked into my structure and quietly, without aggression, made it into something I no longer recognized. I built this alone, I said. Every wall, every seal, every system, alone. And it was perfect when it was mine, complete, self-consistent. And now it's better, he said. Different. Better, Daniel. More efficient, more resilient, more capable. Darren alone has added 6 months to the generator's service life. Sophia's inventory system caught a food spoilage issue you'd missed for weeks. Nina's patrol routes cover blind spots you didn't know you had. I know. Then what's the problem? The problem was that better meant I hadn't been enough. The problem was that perfect for 1 was inferior to functional for 9, and that mathematical reality dismantled the entire philosophical framework I'd used to justify my isolation, not just here, not just in the apocalypse, but for my entire adult life. Every room I'd designed, every building I'd engineered, every relationship I'd treated as a structure to be optimized and controlled, like all of it was the same impulse. Build it alone. Seal it shut. Call the loneliness perfection. I know what the problem is, I said. I'm working on it. He nodded, put his hand on my shoulder, brief, firm, removed before I could flinch from it. Then he went downstairs to his floor. I went upstairs to mine, but I left the stairwell door unlocked for the first time in 40 days. Day 93. The first real test. I was asleep when the alarm sounded. A motion sensor I'd rigged on the parking lot's western edge, wired to a buzzer in the monitoring station that was loud enough to penetrate 2 floors. I was on my feet and dressed and climbing to the roof in under 90 seconds. Below me, I could hear movement on the second-floor doors opening, voices, the sound of people moving with practiced urgency toward their assigned positions. We'd drilled this. My protocol, my design, executed 3 times in the previous weeks. Everyone had a position. Everyone knew the sequence. From the rooftop, I scanned west and found them. Not a scattered wandering group, but a concentrated mass. 40, 50. More emerging from the tree line along the creek bed that ran behind the strip mall a quarter-mile west. Moving with that particular slow purpose that meant they'd locked onto a stimulus sound, light. Something had pulled them toward us. The grow lights. The thought hit me like a structural failure notice. The ground floor conference room windows were sealed with steel plate, but one of the observation slits on the western face had been left uncovered after Darren's last maintenance check. Light, artificial light, in a dead world, pouring through a 2-inch gap into the darkness. I keyed the radio. Craig, Western Observation Slit, Conference Room B. Close it, now. His response came in 3 seconds. On it. I watched the mass approach, 60 now, 70. They moved across the parking lot in an uneven wave, stumbling over the flat asphalt, reaching the building's foundation, and pressing against the walls the way water rises against a dam. No coordination, no strategy, just mass and persistence and the endless patience of things that don't tire. The steel plates held, the concrete held, the barricade weight held. I knew it would. I'd calculated for this. I'd calculated for 10 times this. But calculation and experience are different. And the sound of 70 bodies pressing against your walls in the dark makes your calculations feel like paper. I counted them from the roof. I tracked their movement. I noted that the ones at the rear were beginning to stack against the ones at the front. A compression effect that increased pressure against the barricades beyond individual force. Simple physics. Mass times gravity times angle of lean. The front row wasn't pushing. The back rows were, and the front row was the transmission medium. Darren, I radioed. Pressure reading on western barricade monitoring point. What's the gauge showing? His voice came back from the ground floor. Holding steady, well within tolerance. These things weigh maybe 140 each. We'd need 300 to hit concern levels. 300. I watched more emerge from the tree line. 80, 90, still coming. Everyone hold positions, I said. No noise, no exterior lights. Let the stimulus die. The observation slit was sealed. Craig confirmed. The building went dark, went silent, went still. 9 people breathing quietly in their positions, trusting the walls, trusting the architecture, trusting me. And the dead stood against our walls for 6 hours. 6 hours of patient, mindless pressure while we sat in darkness and said nothing. Maya didn't make a sound. Sophia held her in the ground floor fallback position, and that child, 2 years old, had learned silence the way other children learn to speak. At dawn, they began to drift. The stimulus gone, the persistence faded. One by one, then in clusters, they pulled away from the walls and wandered, some back toward the tree line, others east along Route 66. others in aimless circles in the parking lot that gradually carried them beyond the sight line. By 0900, the lot was clear. I came down from the roof and found everyone in the kitchen, silent, drinking water, sitting close together in a way that had nothing to do with the room's size and everything to do with what they'd just survived. Darren caught my eye. Light leak. My fault. I left the slit uncovered after checking the panel junction yesterday. I opened my mouth to respond to say what? That mistakes were unacceptable? That one error nearly cost us everything? That my system, properly followed, would have prevented this? We'll add it to the post-maintenance checklist, I said instead. Every slit covered, verified by a second person before dark. It was the first time I'd used the word we about the building's operation and meant it. The 2 weeks after the siege were different. Not in the building's structure. I repaired nothing, reinforced nothing, changed nothing physical. The walls were already sufficient. The test had proven them. What changed was invisible, internal, architectural only in metaphor. I started taking meals with the group. Not every meal breakfast I still took alone in the monitoring station, watching the dawn sweep cameras while I ate. But dinner I came down for. I sat at the long prep table in the kitchen, and I ate with 8 other people, and I listened to their conversations without contributing much, but without retreating. Jake told bad jokes. Darren told worse ones. Nina described her life before she'd been a physical therapist in Tulsa, specialized in rehabilitation after spinal injuries. Craig had been a high school history teacher. This surprised me. I'd assumed military or law enforcement, something that explained his command presence. Nope, he said when I told him this. 10th grade American history. I just have the kind of face that makes people do what I say. He grinned. Drove my students crazy. Sophia had been an accountant. Hector a bus driver. Diane a florist. Jake had been a junior in high school, planning to study marine biology. He'd never seen the ocean. I told them I'd been a structural engineer. They already knew this. The building itself was my resume. But I told them about the renovation project that had brought me here. About the tribal council corruption that killed the funding. About the elegant design I'd been forced to degrade into mediocrity by budget constraints and political interference. So you gotta build it right this time, Nina said. Not a question, an observation. Yes. Must have felt good. It did. Does it still? I looked at her. She looked back with the patient clarity of someone whose professional life had been spent helping people acknowledge truths their bodies already knew. It feels different now, I said. Good is insufficient as a description. She nodded like I'd passed a test I didn't know I was taking. Day 100. I marked it on the calendar I'd hung in the monitoring station, a paper calendar from the casino's old supply closet. Months meaningless now, but days still useful for tracking patterns and schedules. 100 days since I'd walked into this building alone. On that morning, Hector's voice came through the radio from the communications room. He'd been spending 4 hours daily working the frequencies, sending Morse code into the void with the patient repetition of a man who'd driven the same route for 30 years. Daniel, I've got something. You need to hear this. I was on the roof. I went down through the unlocked stairwell, unlocked for 2 weeks now. No incident, no intrusion, no degradation of security. I entered the communications room, and Hector had his headset half off. One ear free, his eyes wide with the particular expression of someone who has just made contact with the unknown. Frequency 147.36, he said. Military, automated loop. But it's broadcasting coordinates. Rally point. They're calling it a safe zone. He played the recording through the speaker. A flat, mechanical voice reading GPS coordinates and a repeated message. All survivors proceed to designated assembly point. Military protection, medical facilities. Capacity available. Repeat. All survivors proceed. The coordinates place the rally point 160 miles northeast. Fort Leonard Wood. A military installation. 9 people in a casino stared at me and waited. And I realized they were waiting not for my permission, but for my assessment. They wanted the engineer's evaluation. Could the route be traveled? Could the distance be covered safely? Was the signal genuine? They were asking me to serve the group, not to command it, to offer my expertise as one contribution among 9. Craig said, "What do you think?" I said, "I think we need more information before we make any decisions. I think we verify the signal over multiple days. I think we map the route. I think we plan." He nodded. Then we plan, together. The planning took 11 days. 11 days of route mapping, supply calculation, vehicle assessment, and threat analysis. 11 days during which I functioned as what I actually was, a structural engineer solving a logistics problem rather than what I'd been pretending to be, which was a sovereign. We verified the signal. It broadcast continuously, same frequency, same coordinates, same message. Hector identified military encoding patterns in the transmission structure that suggested genuine origin, not a lure, not a trap, but an institutional broadcast from functioning infrastructure. The signal strength remained constant, which meant powered equipment, maintained systems, operational capacity. The route northeast required crossing approximately 160 miles of mixed-terrain highway, secondary roads, small towns, open farmland. Craig and Nina's intel about the I-44 herd meant we'd need to route north first, then east, adding 40 miles but avoiding the densest known concentration. I calculated fuel requirements, vehicle capacity, supply weight, and pace. 2 vehicles, my truck and a van Darren had hot-wired from the casino's old parking garage during week 3. Combined capacity for all 9 people plus 72 hours of supplies. The debates happened openly now. In the poker room, around the map that was no longer mine but ours, marked in 4 different handwritings, annotated with observations from 6 different rooftop watchers, alive with collaborative intelligence that exceeded anything my solitary analysis had produced. Nina argued for a pre-dawn departure to maximize distance before infected activity peaked in midday heat. Craig preferred a midday start, less distance on day 1, but arrival at a fortified overnight position during full light. Darren calculated fuel consumption at different speeds and recommended a maximum of 40 miles per hour to balance efficiency against engine stress. I listened. I contributed calculations. I corrected 2 route assumptions based on bridge load ratings I knew from professional experience. I did not decide. On day 111, we voted. Dawn departure. Northern route. 2-day transit with overnight at a rural school Jake had identified on the map that showed structural characteristics suggesting defensibility, brick construction, limited ground floor windows, enclosed courtyard. I voted with the majority, not because I agreed with every detail, but because the collective judgment was sound, and I was no longer the person who needed to be right about everything in order to feel real. The night before departure, I walked the building alone. Not for security, Craig had the watch. Darren had sealed the observation slits. Sophia had inventoried the remaining supplies and staged the departure loads in the garage. I walked it for the last time. 3 months of my labor lived in these walls. Every weld, every pore, every cut and bolt and calculated angle, my hands, my mind, my vision made physical. The hydroponic channels hummed with Darren's filtration pump. Sophia's herb garden on the kitchen sill had produced its first harvest 2 weeks earlier, basil, still fragrant in the closed air. Jake's fitness area smelled of rubber mats and effort. Hector's radio station glowed with standby lights. My building, their home. I stood in the high roller lounge and looked out through the observation slits at the dark parking lot. 1,400 hours of work, 300 individual structural decisions, a perfect system of control and isolation and self-sufficiency, made imperfect by the addition of people, made better by the same. I put my hand flat on the wall, concrete, cold, solid. A good wall. A wall I'd poured myself in the 3rd week, mixing and hauling and forming alone in the dark because I couldn't sleep. And the building needed me, and needing to be needed was the only relationship I'd ever maintained successfully. Thank you, I said. To the wall, to the building, to the version of myself that had built it alone and perfect and empty, because that version had kept me alive long enough to become someone who could leave. We departed at 05:30 on day 112. 2 vehicles, 9 people, everything we could carry. I drove the truck. Craig drove the van. We maintained radio contact on a channel Hector monitored from the van's passenger seat. The convoy moved north on secondary roads, avoiding Route 66 entirely based on infected concentration data from 3 months of observation. The first 20 miles were empty. Pre-dawn light on Oklahoma back roads, flat terrain, scattered farmhouses dark and still. No movement, no infected visible. Just the sound of engines and tires and my own breathing in the cab. Jake rode with me. He'd asked specifically, "I want to ride with Daniel." And I'd said yes without understanding why until he started talking 20 minutes in. "You know what my mom used to say about our house?" He said, feet on the dashboard, watching the road. "She said a house is just a box until someone fights in it. Then it's a home. That's a strange definition. She meant it like you have to care enough to disagree. If everyone's just polite and careful, it's a hotel. If people actually push back, argue, say what they need, that's real." I glanced at him. 17 years old, 6 feet tall, couldn't commit to a bedroom. "Is that what the casino was?" "Yeah." He nodded. "It got real after the first time Craig yelled at you about the meeting thing. Before that, it was like living in someone else's project. After that, it was ours." He didn't yell. He did his version of yelling, the quiet, intense thing. You know what I mean. I did know what he meant, and I knew Jake was telling me something generous, that the fracture I'd experienced as loss had been experienced by others as beginning. The moment my control cracked was the moment they started feeling safe enough to be present. My authority had been their cage dressed as shelter. Mile 40. The road curved east toward a small town, Hominy, according to the faded sign. Craig's voice came through the radio. "Vehicles ahead. Looks like a blockade. Stopping." I pulled up behind the van and killed the engine. Through the windshield, I could see it. 3 cars arranged across the road in a deliberate V pattern, pushed into position by hands, not accident. Behind them, the road continued into town past brick buildings and a water tower. "Survivor blockade or trap?" Jake said, suddenly still. "Or just abandoned?" I reached for my binoculars. The cars were old, dusty, flat tires, no sign of recent movement. The buildings beyond showed no lights, no smoke, no life indicators. But the blockade's geometry was intentional. Someone had thought about this. Craig walked back to my window. "Detour adds 6 miles on dirt roads, or we move the cars." Moving cars makes noise. Dirt roads are slow and exposed. I looked at the blockade. The V-pattern channeled approaching traffic toward a narrow gap at the center, wide enough for a vehicle to pass at low speed, but tight enough that you'd have to slow nearly to a stop. Classic funnel geometry. I designed similar traffic control patterns in parking structure work. "Don't go through the gap," I said. "If we move anything, we push the left vehicle off the road entirely. Wide clearance, full speed." Craig nodded. "Darren, Nina, and I push. You keep the engines running. If anything moves in those buildings, we leave. Fast." 3 minutes. That's how long it took 3 people pushing a dead sedan off asphalt, onto the dirt shoulder, the scrape of tires on gravel obscenely loud in the morning stillness. Nothing moved. The town stayed dead. We drove through the gap at 40 miles per hour and didn't slow down until Hominy was 3 miles behind us. Jake exhaled. "That was fine." "That was lucky," I said. "Lucky and fine look identical until they don't." We drove on. The sun rose. The flat Oklahoma landscape gave way to gentle hills as we angled northeast. And with every mile between me and the casino, I felt something I didn't expect. Not loss, not grief, not the phantom limb of severed control. Relief. Mile 80, noon. We'd stopped to refuel from the jerry cans strapped to the truck bed when Darren spotted them, a cluster of figures in the tree line 200 meters east of the road, standing still, faces oriented toward us. "They're watching us," Nina said. She'd climbed on top of the van for elevation, bow in hand, arrow nocked but not drawn. I counted 7, 8, 11. Emerging from the trees with that unsettling patience, not charging, not wandering, just orienting, locking on. The midday heat made them sluggish, Craig's theory went. They moved faster in cool air, slower in warmth. But slow didn't mean stopped. "Fuel up. Move now," Craig said. He was already capping the van's tank. "Don't run. Don't slam doors. Smooth and steady." I finished pouring the jerry can into the truck, hands steady, controlled pour, no spillage. Jake was in the cab with the engine running. I walked to the driver's door at a normal pace, opened it, climbed in, closed it. The figures had covered 50 meters while I'd been pouring. Slow but certain, drawn by engine noise, by motion, by whatever broken signals still fired in what remained of their brains. I pulled out behind the van. In the mirror, I watched them reach the spot where we'd been standing, 11 dead things milling in a cloud of residual fuel smell, turning in confused circles, finding nothing, falling behind as we accelerated to 40. "They're adapting," Jake said quietly. "The ones in OKC used to just charge and run into stuff. These ones watched. They waited." I didn't answer because I didn't want to say what I was thinking. That 3 months behind walls had insulated us from whatever changes the infected population was undergoing. That my observation data was outdated. That my behavioral models, the ones I'd compiled so carefully, so precisely in my engineering journal, were snapshots of an early-stage phenomenon. And the phenomenon had been evolving while I cataloged its past. Control. I had loved my data because it made the dead predictable. Predictable things can be managed. Managed things confirm the manager's competence. But the dead didn't read my journal. They didn't obey my models. They changed while I built walls against the version of them that no longer existed. Mile 100. The terrain shifted, more trees, more hills, the road winding through wooded stretches with limited sight lines. We slowed to 35. Craig's voice on the radio. 2 miles to the school. Dirt road turn off on the right. Everyone stay tight. The school appeared through the trees, a single-story brick building set back from the road behind a chain-link fence. Playground equipment rusted in a small yard. Windows intact, dark, dusty, but unbroken. No signs of forced entry. No signs of occupation. Craig and Nina cleared the building while the rest of us waited in the vehicles with engines running. 12 minutes, an eternity compressed into heartbeats and silence. Then Craig's voice. Clear. Single story, 8 rooms, 2 exits. Defensible for 1 night. We pulled the vehicles inside the fence. Darren secured the gate with chain and padlock from our supply kit. I walked the building's exterior and assessed. Brick construction solid, roof intact, windows single pane but small enough that furniture barricades would hold. Adequate. Not my casino, not my fortress, but adequate for 12 hours. That night, we ate cold canned food in the school's cafeteria. Tiny chairs, tiny tables, crayon drawings still pinned to a bulletin board. Maya sat in one of the small chairs and fit perfectly, and something about that image. A child the right size for the room broke something in my chest that I didn't examine. Sophia looked at me across the table. You're quiet. Thinking about the route tomorrow. Liar. She smiled. You're thinking about the casino. Maybe. Do you miss it? I considered the question. 80 miles of road between me and the building I'd spent 3 months perfecting. The walls I'd poured, the systems I'd designed, the silence I'd mistaken for peace. I miss being certain, I said. The building made me certain. Certain about what? That I was enough. Alone. That I didn't need. I gestured at the room. At them. At all of it. Sophia balanced Maya on her knee and looked at me with that direct clarity that had made me give her a weapon key 2 months earlier. You were enough to build it, she said. You were never enough to live in it. Day 113. 58 miles to Fort Leonard Wood. We departed the school at dawn, no incident overnight. Darren's watch had been silent, the dead apparently absent from this stretch of rural Missouri. The first 30 miles went smooth. Highway 32 East, gently rolling terrain, clear sight lines. We saw infected in the distance, scattered individuals, small clusters near abandoned structures, but nothing that approached the road. The vehicle's speed and steady movement seemed to render us unremarkable to them at range. Just objects in motion. Not food, not stimulus. Just physics. Then we hit the bridge. A 2-lane concrete span over a creek, maybe 40 feet long. Nothing exceptional structurally. But the western approach was blocked by an overturned livestock trailer. And clustered around and beneath and on top of that trailer were approximately 60 infected. Sitting, standing. Motionless in the morning cool, arranged like terrible sculptures around the wreckage. Craig stopped the van 50 meters back. I pulled up beside him. We sat with engines idling, looking through windshields at a blockage that couldn't be driven through, couldn't be driven around. The creek banks were steep, 8 feet down to water, and couldn't be ignored. Detour? Jake said. I checked the map. Nearest alternate crossing is 9 miles north, adds 18 to the route total, and it's a smaller bridge might not handle the van's weight. Craig keyed the radio. Options, talk to me. Darren's voice. We could push the trailer with the truck. Brush guard would take it. But the noise would bring every one of them directly to us, Nina finished. While we're bottlenecked on a bridge approach. Silence on the radio. 9 people thinking. The infected at the trailer sat in their terrible patience, unaware of us at 50 meters, with engines at idle. I looked at the bridge, at the trailer, at the geometry of the situation. The trailer's on its side, I said. The undercarriage faces us. If I approach slow and push from this angle, the trailer slides laterally, not forward into them, but sideways off the road. Opens a lane on the right side. You'd have to get within contact distance, Craig said. The truck cab is enclosed and elevated. They can't reach the driver through sheet metal. They can reach the engine. Pop the hood, pull wiring. They've done it before. In 3 seconds of lateral push, the trailer moves or it doesn't. If it doesn't, I reverse. If it does, you follow immediately. Through the gap, full speed. Silence. Then Craig. Daniel. That's a big risk for one person. It's an engineering problem. The trailer weighs approximately 2 tons empty. The truck produces 400 foot-pounds of torque at the wheels, the coefficient of friction on asphalt with a flat metal surface. Daniel, it will move. And if it doesn't, then I reverse and we take the 9-mile detour. I'm not sacrificing myself. I'm pushing a box off a road. He looked at me through the van's windshield. I looked back. Something passed between us, not authority, not hierarchy. Trust. The trust of a man who'd watched me give up control for 2 months and was now watching me volunteer for risk and trying to decide if those 2 things were related. Go, he said. We'll be right behind you. I put the truck in low gear. The engine growled. I rolled forward at 5 miles per hour, 30 meters, 20. The nearest infected turned its head toward the sound, that terrible slow rotation, like a radar dish finding signal. 10 meters. I could see their faces, their hands, the dried damage on their skin, the torn clothing, the absolute absence behind their eyes. 60 of them in and around a dead trailer on a bridge approach in rural Missouri. And me rolling toward them in a steel box with my hands on the wheel and my jaw clenched so tight my molars sang. Contact. The brush guard met the trailer's undercarriage. I gave it throttle. The tires bit. The trailer groaned metal on asphalt, a scream of friction, and slid. 18 inches, 2 feet, 3 feet. A gap opened on the right, wide enough. I reversed. The infected were rising, orienting, beginning to move toward the noise source. But the van was already through. Craig floored it past my retreating truck. Through the gap, across the bridge. I shifted forward, turned right, cleared the gap with inches on both sides, and the sound of hands slapping the truck bed as I accelerated across the span. In the mirror, 60 figures on a bridge approach, milling, reaching, finding nothing. Jake was pressed against the passenger door, breathing hard. You're insane, he said. I'm an engineer, I said. The math was good. Same thing. 28 miles out from Fort Leonard Wood. The radio signal was strong. Now Hector could receive it clearly on the van's antenna without boosting. The same flat, mechanical voice. The same coordinates. The same promise of military protection and medical facilities and capacity available. But something else came through at mile 142. A different frequency. A human voice, scratchy, exhausted, speaking in fragments between static bursts. Don't go to Leonard Wood, repeat. Do not approach from the south. They've got the south perimeter locked. Infected mass. 1,000 southern approach is a kill zone. Hector's voice came through our radio, tight with urgency. Daniel, Craig, did you copy that? We pulled over. Both vehicles. Everyone clustered around the van's radio as Hector worked the frequency, trying to reacquire the voice. Static, static. Then, Eastern Access Road Route TT. Clear as of this morning. They're letting people through at Checkpoint 6 military escort from the gate. You have to come from the east. Then nothing. The frequency went dead. We sat in silence on the shoulder of a Missouri highway with 28 miles between us and rescue, or between us and a mass of thousands that would make our bridge encounter look like a single scattered wanderer. Craig spread the map on the van's hood. We've been approaching from the southwest. If we continue on this heading, we hit the southern perimeter directly. I traced the roads with my finger. Route TT branches off Highway 17 about 12 miles ahead. If the voice is accurate, we divert there and approach from the east. If the voice is accurate, Nina said. It could be a lure. Redirect people to an ambush point. Military frequency broadcast warning people away from danger doesn't fit an ambush profile, Darren said. An ambush wants you to come, not to change direction. Unless the eastern approach is the trap and the southern approach is actually clear. 9 people. 9 opinions. No consensus emerging naturally. I said nothing for a long time. I looked at the map. I looked at the terrain. I thought about information asymmetry, about making decisions with incomplete data, about the difference between a calculated risk and a coin flip. 2 things are true, I said. The group looked at me. 1. A mass of thousands on the southern perimeter is consistent with what Craig and Nina observed about the II-44 herd 3 months ago. Migration patterns follow infrastructure corridors. A military installation would generate noise, light, electromagnetic activity, all potential attractors. The south-facing approach follows the main highway. Herds follow highways. The warning is credible. 2. Approaching from any direction without visual confirmation is unacceptable. We stop 5 miles out. Craig and I take the truck ahead to observe. If the eastern approach is clear, we bring the group forward. If it's not, we fall back and reassess. Craig looked at me. I looked back. Together, he said. You're a better shot. I'm a better driver. Together makes sense. He nodded, not taking orders, not giving them, agreeing as equals on a plan that used each person's competence where it served the group best. We drove 12 more miles to the Route TT junction and pulled both vehicles into an abandoned farmstead barn intact, vehicles concealed from the road. Sophia organized the group into a defensive perimeter. Nina took overwatch from the barn's hayloft with her bow and a clear sight line down the access road. Craig and I drove east in the truck, alone, armed, radio on, into the last 20 miles of whatever this journey was going to be. 5 miles out. We parked the truck behind a collapsed billboard and walked to a ridge overlooking the eastern approach. Binoculars. Clear morning. And there it was. Fort Leonard Wood spread across the valley below us, fenced, guarded, functioning. Guard towers with visible personnel. Vehicle patrols along the perimeter. Smoke from kitchen facilities. The organized geometry of institutional survival, not improvised, not desperate, but maintained and deliberate. The Eastern Road Route TT led to a checkpoint gate with a short queue of vehicles. 3 cars, a bus. People visible outside, being processed by uniformed personnel. No infected visible in any direction along the eastern approach. I shifted the binoculars south. And there, 2 miles south of the installation's main gate, the herd. The warning voice had understated it. Not thousands. Tens of thousands. A sea of standing bodies pressing against the military's southern fence line, held back by what appeared to be a concrete barrier and a series of vehicle-mounted deterrent systems. The sound reached us even at this distance. A low, continuous moan like wind through a broken building. Jesus, Craig said. The eastern approach is clear, I said. The voice was accurate. We go in from the east. We're fine. And if the southern barrier fails? I looked at it. Concrete barriers, military engineering, active defense systems. It'll hold longer than anything I ever built. Craig lowered his binoculars and looked at me. Really looked, the way he had on that first night in the poker room when he'd asked me if I wanted to stay alone. You built something that held for 3 months, he said. Against everything that came. That's not nothing, Daniel. It held because of all of you. It held because of the walls first, and then because of us. Both things are true. We drove back to the farmstead. I keyed the radio. Route TT is clear. Eastern checkpoint is active and processing survivors. Military presence confirmed. We go now. The sound that came back through the radio, 9 voices overlapping. Relief and tears, and Jake shouting something unintelligible, was the sound of people who'd been holding their breath for 113 days, finally letting it out. We formed the convoy. Truck leading, van following. 18 miles on Route TT paved, clear, empty. The easiest 18 miles of the entire journey. I drove at exactly 40 miles per hour and felt every mile pass beneath the wheels, like a sentence being read aloud. At the checkpoint, a soldier in full gear approached my window. Young, maybe 22, professional, alert but not hostile. How many in your group? 9, 2 vehicles. Any injured or ill? No. Any bites or exposures? No. Where are you coming from? I looked at him, at the gate beyond, at the installation where people moved freely in the open air, where generators hummed, where I could see what appeared to be a medical tent with a Red Cross flag. A casino, I said. East of Tulsa. I built a fortress in it, kept 9 people alive for 113 days. The soldier looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Then he nodded and waved us through. Welcome to Fort Leonard Wood. Processing center is straight ahead on the right. You'll be assigned temporary quarters after medical screening. I drove through the gate. In the mirror, I saw the van follow. 9 people in 2 vehicles entering someone else's structure, someone else's architecture, someone else's authority, someone else's walls. I parked where directed. Killed the engine, sat with my hands on the wheel. Jake touched my arm. Daniel, we're here. I was here. Inside walls I hadn't built. Under authority I hadn't claimed. Surrounded by systems I didn't control and couldn't improve and didn't need to. I opened the door. I stepped out. The ground was concrete, military concrete. Poured by someone else's calculations, engineered by someone else's mind, maintained by someone else's labor. I stood on it, and it held me up the same way my floors had held me. And I didn't need to know its load rating to trust it. They gave us quarters in a converted barracks, small rooms, thin walls, communal bathrooms. After 3 months in a casino, it felt like living inside a filing cabinet. But it was warm, and the water ran hot, and nobody standing outside the walls was trying to get in. On our 3rd day at Fort Leonard Wood, Craig found me sitting on a bench outside the mess hall, watching soldiers reinforce the southern perimeter with additional barrier sections. Professional work. Efficient. Correct. You keep staring at their walls, he said. Professional interest. You want to tell them about the drainage vulnerability at the southeast corner? I looked at him. He was smiling. You noticed that too? You pointed at it 3 times yesterday without saying anything. Your hand just went up. He sat beside me. You could volunteer for the engineering corps. They're taking skilled civilians. Maybe. Not maybe. You should. I watched the soldiers work. Precise, coordinated, collaborative. A team building a wall. Not one man alone in the dark, pouring concrete because sleep wouldn't come, and the building needed him. And being needed was the closest thing he'd found to being loved. Sophia and Maya walked past Maya, toddling now, holding Sophia's hand, making sounds. Not words yet, just sounds. Testing what her voice could do in a world where silence was no longer mandatory. I'd built a fortress. I'd made it perfect. I'd opened it reluctantly, resentfully, one cracked inch at a time, and other people had made it into something I couldn't have imagined alone. And then I'd left it. Voluntarily. Walked away from the only structure I'd ever built without compromise. It was still standing, probably. The walls I'd poured were good walls. They'd outlast whatever inhabited them or didn't. That building would stand empty and sealed and perfect for decades, a monument to the man I'd been at my most controlled and my most alone. My masterpiece of isolation. I didn't miss it. I missed who I thought I was inside it. And I was grateful quietly, without drama, the way concrete is grateful for rebar, that I'd been wrong about what I needed. The next morning, I walked to the engineering office and volunteered. "What's your experience?" the officer asked. "I built a fortress," I said. "But I'm better at building things that let people in."